Let's begin this morning by turning in our Bibles to John chapter 8. John chapter 8. We're going to start in the first verse. John chapter 8. Verse 1. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "If any of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Now go and leave your life of sin." Jesus was teaching in the temple courts. Notice, he was not alone. Usually when we picture this scene, especially when we see the movies, Jesus is always off kind of by himself. And these men drag this woman before him. I think they were trying to embarrass him and show him off before the disciples that were there with him. And they threw him at his feet and they demanded that he judge her. I find the contrast, though, in this story very interesting. There's the contrast between the men and this woman. You know, as I look at them, I have to ask myself, are they really very different? I mean, the men, they're angry. And they're full of hypocrisy. The woman is sinful. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And I wonder whether she was really sorry for what she was doing, or was she more upset that she was caught? Then there's the contrast between the men and Jesus. These men, they're full of righteous indignation, and they're very loud. I don't know, have you noticed that about people? When they're self-righteous, they're loud. Whenever I hear somebody whose emotions are over the top when they're talking about someone else and their sin, I question that. Because normally I found out they have a very similar problem themselves. But Jesus, he's there, he's quiet and he's merciful. And then there's the woman in Jesus. She's scared and she's feeling very alone. And Jesus here, of all things, he's approachable. But he's firm. He does not enable this woman in what she was doing. Of all the people in this story, only Jesus had the right to judge and condemn. But he didn't. Because, see, it was not the day to condemn. That day's coming, but that was not the day. And I want you to notice, I mentioned this a while ago, but he did not enable her to continue in her sin. He said to her, after the men left, he said to her, "Go and leave your life of sin." Guys, that was grace and a warning. Amen. All rolled up into one. Jesus saw something, though, that these men could not see. He saw her sin, but he also saw her loneliness and her pain. He saw that this woman at that moment needed a friend. And as you look around, there was no friends for her there, except for Jesus. You know, we have people around us just like that woman today. They're all around us. Their lives are filled with loneliness and with pain. There are people out there, they need a friend. Many people in our society today are friendless. We live in an age of loneliness. Did you realize that? Do you notice how people live? We got people all around us, and they're lonely. In our communities, in our neighborhoods today, they're divided. And we're very divided today in our political landscape today, aren't we? And to protect ourselves, we build fences around our lives. We're really good at building fences. Sometimes we build physical fences around our lives. And we lived in Colorado. Wooden fences was a big thing there in Denver. Everybody had a big wooden fence around their backyard. So you couldn't see in and you couldn't see out. And we lived in a house and we had a chain link fence. We were different. And I owned the chain link fence. And we had this house right behind ours. And they had 3 boys the same age as my son. And after school, our son would run out in the backyard and he would jump the fence and play for an hour or two with his friends there. We came home one day from school and those people in that house had built a wooden fence around their backyard, cutting my son off. And he could just walk around the block because the walk around the block was about a mile to that house because of the way the streets were laid out. I can't tell you how heartbroken he was because he lost those friends that day. We build emotional fences around our lives to shut other people out. Fences such as depression, anxiety, substance abuse. A lot of people build the fence of victimization around them. Everybody's a victim today. We build fences of busyness. We get so busy we don't notice people around us. We don't notice their loneliness and their pain. Probably the biggest fence we build is sin in our lives. And that develops into the fence of guilt and shame. And that's a thick fence that people have. Many people need a friend. And Jesus has called us to be that friend to them. As his disciples, Jesus sent them into the world to be friends of those in need. Look in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, we're going to begin in verse 1. Verse 1. Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. Rather, we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ is Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Christ's sake. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine in our heart and to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. Paul starts out there in verse 1. He starts out by saying, since we have this ministry. He's talking to us, guys. And ministry is about friendship. I think too often we make ministry and evangelism hard work. But more times than not, it's about being somebody's friend and being there for them. He says he has given us ministry. Look down in verse 6. Because here's the ministry right here. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine in our heart to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. See, Christ has shined His light into our lives so that we can in turn reflect it back out to others. I love how he says we have this treasure in jars of clay. The older I get, the more brittle I realize my clay is. See, Jesus, He befriended us first. And His love for us, that is our motivation for loving other people and being the friend of other people. See, we're to befriend others on His behalf. He can't physically be here today, but we are. Remember, Jesus told His disciples, when I'm gone, I'll be able to do far more. Because see, when He walked this earth, He was one individual. But now He has us, living for Him. Flip over one chapter, chapter 5. Verse 18. Still talking about this ministry that God has given us. It says, all this is from God, who reconciled to us through Christ and gave us, get that, gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to Himself in Christ, not counting men's sins against Him. And He has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making His appeal through us. See, God has called us to be ministers of reconciliation. And He has sent us out into the world to be His ambassadors. We represent Him. When I lived in Russia, people in Russia, they tried to engage me at times in political talk. And they tried to always put Russia up against the United States. And I had people try to bait me into arguments. And I had to realize, you know what? I'm not there for the United States. I wasn't there to debate the virtues of the United States of America. I was an ambassador for Christ. And that's what I wanted to talk to people about. Go back to chapter 4 and look at verse 2. Paul here says, we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. Here Paul says, we commend ourselves to every man's conscience. You know what it means to commend yourself to somebody? It means to get involved in their lives. That's what that means. As Christians, we are to be involved. I don't think we have the right to say, well, you know, I just don't like to get involved. And I've heard Christians say that. We're to be involved. In verse 4 it tells us why we need to be involved. Now look at verse 4 very carefully. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers. They cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Satan has the world blind. We worry about the fact that many people cannot see or understand things the way we understand it. That's why they're blind. They've been blinded by Satan. And that's what we should not question why they can't see the way we do. Because it's very obvious why. Satan is very good at deceiving people and blinding people. I was reading a book yesterday, and it said that Satan has no power except illusion. And he's very good at it. And he uses that to blind people and to blind us if we let him. And that's why so many people today can't see the evil that they live with. They can't see the evil that's in their own lives. And when people aren't aware of Satan's schemes, he wins. and He's very good. And unless we get involved and befriend them and teach them, they will remain in their blindness. I want to show you how Paul describes the lost. Look at Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17. Paul writes, "So I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensualities so as to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more." In verse 17, Paul speaks of the futility of their thinking. That Greek word there that is translated futility, it means emptiness as to the results. In other words, they work so hard and come up with a big fat zero in their life for it. That's where the thinking of the world takes them. See, our world has rejected Jesus. And it's interesting. As I listen to the philosophy of the world and the postmodern world that we live in this day and age of relativism, which is the philosophy of this age, the best that they can come up with is that there is no right and there is no wrong. And that's a classic recipe for disaster in people's lives. And you don't have to look far to see it. Denise and I got with a couple recently. They're not Christians. And they're having marital problems. And they'd separated, and they'd come together, and they'd separated, and they'd come together, and we got with them. And we told them, I said, you have to get your life right with God first. Because you're not going to solve anything unless you get your... And I said, I would love to sit down and start studying the Bible with you. Well, I've studied the Bible before, and I've studied with several people, and I know the Bible. I don't think so. We recently got a telephone call from them, and they called it quits. See, that's where the philosophy of this world takes you. It's a classic recipe for disaster in your life. And see, the world is that way because of the way the world thinks. And they've been blinded by Satan. Verse 18 says they're darkened in their understanding. That's blindness right there. Verse 19 says they've lost all sensitivity. The Greek word there means being past feeling. They've hurt for so long, they can't feel pain any longer. That's what that means. They become numb and indifferent to the evil that is around them. And see what that does? That leads to a loss of conscience. They have no pain to the pain around them. They feel no guilt or empathy towards other people. And speaking of pain, Satan uses pain, emotional pain and physical pain, to blind us. It can be from the pain from the guilt of sin or the pain from the consequences of sin. Verse 19 says they give themselves over to every kind of impurity. See, Satan uses pain to drive people towards more pain, towards sin. And as pain increases, our guilt is dulled. People get into bad relationships. You see somebody, just like they jump from bad relationship to bad relationship to bad relationship. You wonder, don't you ever learn? You know why they don't? Because Satan has dulled them to their pain. They get into drugs, into alcohol to deal with the pain, but it really doesn't. And that's the downward spiral you see with people. It's how they just keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper into it. Sin is the gift that keeps on giving. And this leads me to my last point. See, Jesus expects us to use our lives to shine His love into their lives. See, that's what Jesus expects from us. Go back to 2 Corinthians 4, and let's look at verse 5. Paul says, verse 5, "For we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ is Lord. And ourselves as your servants for Christ's sake. For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' made His light shine into our heart to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our bodies the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our bodies. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that His life may be revealed in our mortal bodies. So then, death is at work in us, but life is at work in you." Paul says, we don't preach ourselves. We preach Jesus. And Jesus must always be our message. Verse 6 says that God made His light shine into our lives so that we can shine it into other people's lives. But here's the problem. Here's the catch. We must be willing to let Jesus use us if we're going to be able to shine His light into other people. And that means sacrifice. Listen to verse 11. "For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that His life may be revealed in our body, in our mortal bodies." See, if we're going to let our light shine to others, we have to get out of ourselves. We have to be willing to get involved. We have to get rid of the fences that we've built in our lives that keeps us from seeing into the lives of other people. And that takes work and effort on our part. And brothers and sisters, that's the only hope this world has. Because if we don't do it, there is no other plan. We're Jesus' plan. Jesus was called the friend of sinners. And that's because He took the time to see the emptiness and the loneliness in people's lives, and then to turn around and minister to them. He didn't just sit and walk away saying, "I don't want to get involved." He got His hands dirty. So getting involved means getting your hands dirty. He didn't do it to coddle them or enable them in His sin, but to lift them out of the blindness caused by their sin and by the god of this age. Ray Boltz, who is a Christian singer, sung a song a few years ago called "The Stones." I want to read the words to you. "We don't really know much about her. We don't really know her name. But the way she was treated was a shame. She heard the angry voices. There was nothing that she could say. It wouldn't have mattered anyway. All she saw were the stones. She felt so helpless, so all alone. How she longed for the face of a friend. But oh, all she saw were the stones. They pulled her from her lover's arms out into the street. They drug her to the synagogue and threw her at Christ's feet. This woman is an adulteress, and our law is very clear. The master saw her looking down. Her eyes were filled with tears, because all she saw were the stones. She felt so helpless, so all alone. How she longed for the face of a friend. But oh, all she saw were the stones. Jesus looked up from the crowd, and then He said to them, "You be the first to cast a stone if you have never sinned." One by one they walked away. They left the stones behind. I wish I could have seen her face when she opened up her eyes, because all she saw were the stones. Jesus said, "I forgive you. Go and sin no more." She knew she'd never be the same. I like the line in this song. She felt so helpless, So all alone, how she longed for the face of a friend. There are many people like that out in the world today. All they can see are the stones. All they can see are the difficulties and the problems and the hardships. And deep down, they're longing for the face of a friend. And to be the church of Jesus Christ, we have to be willing to engage the lives of others and to be their friends. Church, are we willing to do that? Are you willing to get involved and to be that friend? You may be here today saying, I need a friend. Oh, how I've longed for a friend in my life. Well, you believe it or not, you have a friend like that. His name is Jesus Christ. And He's here not to condemn, but He's here to offer grace and peace to you today. And we're here too. And we're here to help you as best we can. If you need the prayers from the church, we're here for you today. And we gladly will do that for you. If you've never given your life to Jesus, we're here to help you do that today too if you need help. If we can help you in any way, why don't you come today while we stand and sing?